Welcome to Stuff They Didn't Teach Me in Sunday School. Let me introduce you today to the person that I consider to be sort of the Rambo of the Old Testament. If you've seen the Rambo movies, Rambo's sort of this independent guy who carries out his own sort of personal vendetta without regard to the authorities he represents or without regard to anyone else, really. And that's how I see Samson, the next judge in the Old Testament. Samson often is painted as a hero in the Old Testament, and there are heroic dimensions to Samson's life. But Samson strikes me as just a pretty self-centered individual, not very concerned about the nation and not even very concerned about his God. The story opens with a theme that we're used to seeing in the Old Testament and we'll see it again and again through the Old Testament and the New Testament, and that is of a exceptional child being born to a formerly barren couple. And so Samson comes on the scene, and when he does, his parents are told that he should be raised as a Nazirite. A Nazirite vow involved not cutting your hair and not drinking alcohol. Not drinking alcohol would be the difficult part of that, because it was hard to find beverages in Israel other than spring water that would not be alcohol. Grape juice wouldn't stay grape juice very long without refrigeration. So Samson is a Nazirite. He's taken this vow to God, and this is how he's to live his life. But as the story unfolds, you find out that Samson is just one pretty self-centered dude. In the first story, in chapter 14, he marries a Philistine woman, much against his parents' wishes. They in effect say, can't you find a nice Israeli woman here? Why are you running off to Philistia to find a Philistine woman? He marries the Philistine woman. On the way to his wedding, he encounters a lion, and with his bare hands, he kills the lion. Then when he goes back later, he finds in that lion that bees have set up shop and established a nest there, and he takes some of the honey and eats it on his way. And then by the time he gets to his wedding, at the wedding festival, and the wedding feast went on for 7 days, at the wedding festival, he tells everybody a riddle. The riddle is in chapter 14, verse 14. He said to them, out of the eater came something to eat, out of the strong came something sweet. If they can tell him the riddle, he will give them 30 linen garments and 30 festal garments. Well, they don't understand. They don't get it. They can't get the riddle. They want to get the riddle, so they start working on his wife. This brand new wife, 7 days old, and the marriage 7 days old, and she starts working on Samson and says, you gotta tell me the riddle. You gotta tell me the answer. And Samson finally gives in, tells her, and she, who's been threatened by the rest of the Philistines, tells them the answer to the riddle. And they come and see him, and in verse 18, and the men of the city said to him on the 7th day before the sun went down, what is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion? And in Samson's line, I love this. For those of you that are old enough to remember the show Hee Haw, this sounds like it ought to come right out of the show Hee Haw. Samson says, if you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have found out the riddle. I love that. If you hadn't plowed with my heifer, you would not have found out the riddle. Samson has to make good on the bet, and so to do so, he kills a bunch of Philistines and takes their clothes and gives them to the other Philistines. After a bit, Samson goes down once again, goes and visits his wife, and come to find out that when he gets to Philistia to visit his wife, she'd been given away to another man. Samson is angry. He goes and catches 300 foxes. You got to picture this. He catches 300 foxes. He ties their tails together and lights their tails on fire and lets them go in a wheat field and totally destroys the wheat crop. Now, I can't imagine what foxes do when you tie their tails together in the first place. They got to just run all over the place. And then when you light them on fire, I'm pretty sure they run faster. And the wheat fields were just destroyed by Samson's action. Again, this is all personal. This is not nationalism. This is not any concern for his nation. This is concern for Samson personally. The story you're probably most familiar with is the story when Samson gets involved with Delilah, not his wife, by the way, and another Philistine woman. And the Philistines have had it with him. Samson has wreaked havoc on this nation. There are other stories about what he's done with Philistia, and they've had it with him. They want him under control. And so they start working on Delilah to try to find out from Samson where his strength lies. And Samson tells her a bunch of lies. If you tied me with new ropes, then you could subdue me. So they tie him up with new ropes, and he breaks them. Now, we said Samson was strong. We didn't say he was smart. And that comes through in this story as he tells them several things to do to try to subdue him. And every time he wakes up, she's already done it to him. And he keeps telling her. Finally, he tells her what approximates the truth. He says, if you cut my hair, I'll lose my strength. I don't know if he really knew that that would happen. But the cutting of the hair is a severing of the vow that he had with Yahweh. And when they do cut his hair, they do subdue him. Maybe in his death, you see Samson as possibly his most self-centered. Some would argue at his death there's a turnaround. I would argue that he hasn't changed much at all. When they subdue him, when the Philistines subdue him after his hair is cut, they poke his eyes out and they turn him into a slave. And one night at a big party, they bring him out for entertainment. And Samson says, take me over and lean me against a pillar in this building. And they do. And then he prays to God and he says, Lord, let me avenge myself for one of my two eyes. And he pulls the pillar down and the building collapses on top of him and all of the Philistines that were in it. And we're told at the end of chapter 16, so the dead whom he slew at his death were more than those whom he had slain during his life. To me, Samson is an indication that God can use just about anyone. Sometimes we're told that you have to do such and such so that God can use you. You have to be inside his will so that he can use you. You have to pray correctly so that he can use you. You know what? God can use whomever he wants to use. And in this case, he used a self-centered, antagonistic, vengeful judge in the nation of Israel to carry out his punishment, his judgment upon the Philistines, the neighboring nation to Israel. God uses you and me. He uses us when we're in his will, and you know, sometimes he uses us when we're outside of his will. He uses you and me to get his job done. And for those times when he uses us when we're outside his will, he sent his son Jesus Christ to pay for our rebellion too. And for Samson's. I don't know if you'll see Samson in heaven. I kind of hope so. I plan on checking around. But I do know he wasn't a perfect man, but God continued to use him.